Battle of Gettysburg, July 1st, 1863. The Battle of Gettysburg was a major turning point in the Civil War, and is also known as the bloodiest battle of the war, as 50,000 lives were lost in total. What caused this? General Robert E. Lee decided to keep moving north after the Confederate victory at Chancellorsville at the start of May. By doing this, he could better guarantee the safety of Richmond. On June 3rd, the Confederate Army marched west to fortify lines in Fredericksburg, and then crossed the Potomac River and crossed into Union territory. Major General Joseph Hooker was informed of the location of the Confederate Army after 9 days, where they were across the Rappahannock River. Joseph Hooker planned to strike Richmond, which would call Lee's bluff. However, Lincoln's government intervened and ordered against him, as the main mission was to protect Washington, D.C. Neither of the sides had consistent reports of the whereabouts of the opponent. Cavalries were out of touch with the generals. On June 28th, Lee found out that Hooker and the Union Army were at Frederick, Maryland. At the same time, he learned that Hooker had been relieved of his command and replaced with Major General George G. Meade, who Lee knew. With this information, Lee ordered his troops to concentrate 35 miles southwest of Pennsylvania's capital, where they stayed at Cashtown. Meade had also moved further north, taking a defensive position in Emmitsburg. Emmitsburg was 12 miles south of Cashtown. The two armies sighted each other west of Gettysburg on June 30th. The Union didn't deploy the cavalry, but returned in the morning to collect footwear from a shoe factory. The movement was seen by Marcellus, a lieutenant for the Confederates, who fired the first shots. Start of battle. July 1st, Brigadier General John Buford was a general for the Union. He believed that cavalry should dismount and deploy the infantry when on the battlefield. This maneuver helped defend against the Confederates until backup arrived. When the fighting started, both Lee and Meade were far away and didn't have any influence until they reached the field. Neither army wanted to fight at Gettysburg. But when the battle ensued, the colliding forces poured into Gettysburg. The Union had a strong army, but they were further away from Gettysburg. A.P. Hill's corps was attacking from the west, and R.S. Ewell's corps was coming from the north, which added up to be an overwhelming pressure on the Union line, which was held up by Corps 1 and 11. The extreme pressure resulted in the loss of General John F. Reynolds, forcing them to retire. Lee arrived in the afternoon, and he found Ewell and Hill occupying and commanding ground north and west, and the Union gathering around Cemetery Hill, a hill to the south. Lee knew it had to be taken back before it could be reinforced. Lee ordered Ewell to carry the high ground, if practicable. However, General Ewell was also in command of the men of a deceased general, Stonewall Jackson. If practicable was an order that Lee commonly gave to Jackson, which meant for Jackson to interpret and formulate his own plan. Ewell was unaware, and understood it as literal. Ewell decided not to call for another attack because they had suffered heavy casualties. While Union reinforcements were arriving, they formed a defense line on high ground south of the town, with the right being on Culp's Hill, south along Cemetery Ridge, until they reached two other hills, Little Round Top and Big Round Top, which rested on the left. General Meade arrived around midnight on July 1st and approved of the ground. Lee rejected advice to maneuver around the Union's left side and instead made a plan to carry out early on July 2nd. Longstreet's troops would attack from the south end of Seminary Ridge and advance northeast of a point along Emmitsburg Road, which Lee had wrongly thought the Union's left was posted. His hopes were for the onslaught to be powerful enough to push the army away from Seminary Ridge. A.P. Hill would provide a diversion by cannonading, a technique of rapid fire from heavy artillery. With these factors, Lee was hoping the Union wouldn't be able to tell where the main blow was coming from before it was too late. The plan slowly started to come apart, first starting with Longstreet's delayed attack, which meant his troops would attack at 4:30 p.m. Artillery and infantry were diverted to Little Round Top, which arrived just in time to hold out against the approaching Confederates. For 4 hours, some of the fiercest fighting occurred around famous landmarks, Devil's Den, the Peach Orchard, and the Wheat Field. While some of the Union was pushed back, the Confederate Army failed to penetrate the Union. Lee was unaware of the Union-led soldiers that outnumbered his army, and felt that victory was within grasp. At 4:30 a.m., the Union started a bombardment at Ewell's position around Culp's Hill that lasted 6 hours and resulted in Confederate withdrawal. Lee then constructed a plan involving the weakened Union center and planned for a heavy artillery barrage and a front of fresh troops to lead, and then cavalry would bring around the rear of the Union. Longstreet was commanded to gather 150 pieces of artillery along Seminary Ridge to cover a storming party of fresh troops. The artillery started firing around 1 p.m. in hopes of softening the way for the infantry. The Union quickly replied with 80 guns, and for 90 minutes Gettysburg reverberated with the loudest cannonade the world had then known. It was noisy, but wasn't effective. When the Confederates started to run low on ammunition, and Union forces were seen to withdraw from Cemetery Hill, the Confederate Army crossed to a clump of trees on Cemetery Ridge, which Lee had told them to advance to. When orders were given, the Union fired minié balls, and the Confederate attack was persistent. The Union quickly plowed the storming party, which left 150 soldiers. These soldiers were led by Brigadier General Lewis Armistead, and got inside the Union's line. The soldiers were completely unsupported by Longstreet, and the assault was known as Pickett's Charge. The attack quickly lost momentum, and the men were isolated a mile away from their army. Lee sent men to form a line along Seminary Ridge to fend off a possible counterattack. Lee and his army retreated to Virginia. This ended the bloodiest battle of the Civil War.